1964. The Summer Olympics in Tokyo. LBJ defeats Barry Goldwater. The launch of Gemini 1. And CBS agrees to buy Fender electric instruments.
January 15th, 1965. The date when Columbia Broadcasting Systems bought Fender electric instruments from Leo Fender. They then, within a few months, changed the corporate name to Fender Musical Instruments. So it was Fender Electric, then it became Fender Musical. Anything made before that date is considered pre-CBS. For the few years following that date is incremental changes to the product that brings us all the way through the 70s. Not many people know this, but Leo Fender was signed a deal to stay on the board as an advisor up until 1972. So he was still at the factory working and trying to come up with different inventions, including the 3-bolt neck. So we're going to take you through a few things, and we'll start with amplifiers, go through guitars, but this is just a quick primer on pre-CBS Fender musical instruments. First off, let's talk guitars. The first product Fender ever made was a broadcaster with a black pickguard. They made these for about 3 years, 3.5 years, black guard, broadcaster, no caster, and then Telecaster. Why did they name it a Telecaster? Television. The world was obsessed with television. You'll notice on these earlier guitars they have kind of a butterscotch finish. This kind of faded, so they went to, in the mid-50s, more of a blonde finish, which looks like this Telecaster right here. This blonde finish is more of a white finish all throughout the 50s. Then, of course, in 54, they started coming out with the sunburst finish, more like Gibson's, on the Stratocaster. Generally speaking, Strats were sunburst, Telecasters were Tele Blonde, a see-through limed wood finish on the Telecasters, and a see-through two-tone sunburst on the Stratocasters. What you'll see in amplifiers is what was called a TV front, and you can see this looks like a TV front. From there, the amplifiers went to a wide panel, where this panel comes out, and then by the late 50s, some of the greatest Fenders of all time are narrow panels. All the models had this. The little Princetons, the little Champs, the Deluxes like this amplifier here, and on up had the same features. Wide panel, TV panel, narrow panel. From there, they went to a brown rubberized finish that they got from one of the tire manufacturers called Tolex. This is a more durable finish than the luggage linen they were using. These came around after the turn 1960, so 61, 62, brown. They also started coming out with white and later went to black with black face. All of these instruments here in front of us are pre-CBS, which means they were made before January 1965. Later, incrementally, they did modifications to the guitars, trying to keep up with demand and competition. You'll see bound fingerboards on Jazzmasters and Jaguars. Why? Because Gibson did it. You'll see block inlays on later 60s instruments. Why? Because Gibson did it. Later in 1968, they started using less lacquer and more poly finishes, which were more plastic and more durable. That happened in the late 60s, all through the 70s. We're not going to get into the 70s instruments that much, but let's just say there was an incremental change to the instruments over time. Nothing happened overnight. Nobody blew a big whistle and had everybody stop manufacturing this way and start manufacturing this way. Everything was also introduced mid-year. A lot of people forget. They say, when did this happen? In 64, they didn't do that. In 64, they didn't do that. They did everything mid-year. In June was the NAMM show, the trade show, so they tried to introduce new products, put them out for display in June at the NAMM show, and then manufacture them the second half of that year. So you'll see a lot of 65 instruments that are different in early 65 than they are later 65. still 1965 instruments. We're trying not to get into too much detail on this, but it is worth noting, as Fender went along, they advertised more and more that it was distortion-free performance is what they're going. With each generation of amplifiers, they were trying to get more and more high fidelity, more distortion-free. It seems, now looking back, that a little bit of distortion was what people really want. So these narrow panel tweed amplifiers and these brown and white amplifiers have just the right amount of harmonic distortion. As they got into the 70s, they got cleaner and cleaner and cleaner until they finally came out with a master volume. However, these instruments represent some of America's finest amplifiers. These instruments, like this 1958 two-tone Stratocaster, represents some of American culture's finest moments. Pre-CBS Fenders always go up in value, always are in demand. They're durable, they're reliable, they stay in tune, and they're worth chasing. More on this after this word from our sponsor.
Confidence in Chrysler Engineering launches the longest protection plan available from any car maker in America. The new Chrysler 550 Protection Plan.